The night in Ouagadougou was unusually quiet, too quiet. Inside the presidential palace, President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the tall glass window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the sleeping city. The dry wind carried the weight of dust and uncertainty. Something felt off. For weeks, whispers of sabotage and betrayal had echoed through the walls of his administration. Military strategies were leaking, private meetings were no longer private, and somehow, enemies always seemed to be a step ahead. This wasn't coincidence, it was treason. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video. It helps more people discover the truth and inspiration behind leaders like Ibrahim Traoré. Share this message of African unity, self-reliance, and rising hope with your friends and community. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real stories, powerful moments, and a vision of a new Africa led by its own people. Together, let's amplify the voices shaping our future. Burkina Faso had just begun its bold journey toward African self-reliance. Traoré had expelled foreign troops, reclaimed the nation's gold reserves, restored sovereignty over land that was once leased for scraps, and reignited the voice of a nation long silenced. He promoted the vision of a united Africa, free from external manipulation, a new era driven by African unity, new African money, and the power of Africans standing on their own feet. But not everyone was ready for that change. Late one evening, a coded message reached the palace. A young and loyal soldier, Captain Ibrahim Zongo, had picked up something unusual while monitoring radio signals in the north. Hidden within a fake agricultural report were classified maps, names of operatives, and confidential state information, files only known to Traoré's closest inner circle. Someone on the inside had turned. That night, Ibrahim called a confidential midnight meeting. No phones, no aides, no press. Just 6 of his most trusted allies. Zongo entered the room, his face pale, carrying a manila folder that shook slightly in his hands. As he laid the documents on the table, all eyes fell on one name, Colonel Desire Ouattara. An old comrade. A brother in arms. A man who had once taken a bullet to protect Ibrahim during a coup attempt. Now, that same man was selling them out. No one spoke. The air turned heavy. Ibrahim looked around the table, his face carved from stone. "No one arrests him," he said softly. "Not yet. We follow. We trace the venom back to its nest." In the days that followed, the palace operated like normal, on the surface. Smiles were exchanged. Ceremonies conducted. But beneath the surface, a silent war raged. Ibrahim played his role with ease, delivering speeches about African pride and growth, shaking hands with diplomats. Yet behind the scenes, Captain Zongo and a small task force shadowed Colonel Ouattara's every move. What they uncovered sent chills down Ibrahim's spine. Late at night, Ouattara left the palace, dressed in civilian clothes, slipping into a black car with no escort. Each time, he drove to the same quiet residence near the French embassy. From the outside, it appeared abandoned. But the surveillance camera they placed across the street told a different story. On multiple occasions, Ouattara met with 2 foreign men, 1 American, 1 European, exchanging files for briefcases. One night, the file contained Ibrahim's detailed travel plans for the upcoming month. When Ibrahim saw the footage, his heart sank. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a threat to his life and the fragile hope of a continent waking up. The man he trusted like family had handed his fate over to outsiders. But Ibrahim did not lash out in anger. He responded with the precision of a tactician. He picked up the secure line and gave Captain Zongo a 2-word command: "It's time." The trap was set. The next morning, Colonel Ouattara was summoned to a top-level security briefing in the Defense Ministry's tower. He walked in as he always did, poised, smiling, confident. But the room was different this time. 10 elite soldiers lined the walls, guns drawn, faces still. At the center stood Ibrahim himself. For a moment, Ouattara froze. Then the smile faltered. "You were my brother," Ibrahim said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Why?" Ouattara stared at the ground, silent. "You sold this country, for what? A suitcase of dollars? Empty promises from dying empires?" Ibrahim stepped closer, his eyes burning with resolve. "Did you think they'd protect you? That they'd build your future while they buried ours?" Still, no response. Only shame. Ibrahim turned to the room. "This is what the new African money must never become, bought. Our freedom cannot be rented. Our unity is not for sale. We stand for African self-reliance, not dependency dressed as diplomacy." The arrest was swift. No blood, no chaos. Just justice. News of the betrayal spread quickly, but so did the message: the era of manipulation was ending. The Africa that Ibrahim Traoré envisioned, one of dignity, ownership, and solidarity, was no longer a dream. It was reality, guarded by vigilance, led with purpose. And above all, it was a promise: never again would Africa's future be decided behind closed doors in foreign embassies. From now on, it would be written by Africans, for Africans. Captain Zongo placed the black suitcase on the table. Inside, crisp foreign bills, 2 hidden tracking devices, and a USB drive. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The room fell into a heavy silence. Ibrahim Traoré looked straight at Colonel Ouattara, his voice cold but composed. "You're not going to prison," he said. "You're going to talk." Beneath the palace, Ouattara sat alone in a dark, windowless room. The walls were bare. There was no clock, just silence and a flickering bulb above. For 2 days, he hadn't slept. Gone was the confident soldier. In his place sat a broken man, hunched over, haunted by what he had done. Behind a one-way mirror, President Traoré watched him. His face remained unreadable, but his soul bore the weight of heartbreak. This was the man he had once shared meals with, fought beside, laughed with. This was the man who had sold out his people. Captain Zongo entered the room again and placed the USB on the table. "We opened it," Zongo said. "Every file you gave them, every secret, it's all here." Ouattara didn't lift his head. "You don't have to talk," Zongo added. "But when they learn you've been caught, they'll drop you. You're nothing to them now. We're your only chance." Hours passed. Then, slowly, Ouattara began to speak. He told them everything. The betrayal had started a year earlier. First, the foreign agents came with compliments. Then came promises, money, a luxury home in Paris, a senior post at the UN, even whispers of becoming the future leader of Burkina Faso once Traoré was removed. They spoke of power, of influence, of restoring order. But order for whom? "I thought they would protect me," Ouattara whispered. "But they were using me." Ibrahim finally entered the room and sat across from the man he once called brother. A long pause passed. "You didn't just betray me," he said quietly. "You betrayed every mother in the village, every child hoping for a better tomorrow. You betrayed the soldiers who bleed for this land. You sold their future." Ouattara lowered his head. "I'm sorry." "You'll answer for what you've done," Ibrahim said, standing. "But first, you'll help us stop them." And with that, the mission began. They would fight back, not with guns, but with intelligence. They would use Ouattara's remaining trust with the agents to send them false information, leading them into traps, exposing their networks. Burkina Faso would no longer be hunted. It would become the hunter. Soon, one embassy official mysteriously vanished. Another was quietly extracted under diplomatic cover. A third was exposed in a leaked report. Across the capital, the whispers shifted. Traore wasn't weak. He wasn't alone. He was awake, and so was the nation. In the war of shadows, Burkina Faso had found its lion. Behind the scenes, Captain Zongo led the counterintelligence team from a hidden command room. Maps lined the walls. Radios buzzed constantly. Blinking lights marked each step of the operation. Every night, Ibrahim visited in silence, guiding the operation with patience and purpose. They called it the reversal. Ouattara fed the foreign agents forged military plans and fake diplomatic leaks, carefully crafted lies meant to disorient and divide. The agents trusted him. They thought they were still in control. They weren't. This wasn't just a fight to protect borders. It was a defense of identity. A stand for African unity. A declaration that new African money wouldn't be printed with blood, but with integrity. That African self-reliance was no longer a slogan. It was strategy, it was leadership, it was survival. Then came the big moment. One of the senior foreign agents requested a covert extraction operation using intel they believed was real, routes, times, locations. Everything looked legitimate. But it wasn't. Every step of the plan had been planted by Ibrahim and his team. The agent walked right into their hands. When he was arrested, diplomatic immunity couldn't save him. This time, the truth came with evidence, recordings, papers, even video from the spy house. The world watched, stunned. And for the first time in decades, Burkina Faso was not painted as the victim of manipulation, but as the architect of its own liberation. President Ibrahim Traoré stood in front of his people days later, the Burkinabe flag waving behind him. "We were told we were too small to stand alone," he said. "But our ancestors stood alone with nothing but courage. Now we stand with each other. And that is everything." The crowd erupted. They were no longer afraid. They had seen the enemy's face. And they had watched their leader face it, unshaken. Africa was changing. And Ibrahim Traoré was at the heart of it. The message came late in the night, urgent, coded, and sent through encrypted channels. A man named Reed, working under the title of Agriculture Advisor, had requested a secret meeting with Colonel Ouattara at a safe house just outside the capital. On the surface, it looked like business. But Ibrahim Traoré knew better. This wasn't agriculture, it was a final move. "They're planning something big," Captain Zongo warned. "Something dangerous." Ibrahim's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. "We end this now," he ordered. There would be no uniforms, no noise. Only silence and shadows. At midnight, Colonel Ouattara stepped into the safe house, wearing a tiny microphone and a tracker sewn into his belt. His hands trembled. If this went wrong, it could be the end of him. But he also knew, he owed this much to his country. Inside, Reed and another European agent were already waiting. Their faces were cold, calm, predatory. "You've been quiet," Reed said, leaning back. "Is the president suspicious?" Ouattara forced a confident nod. "He trusts me. I brought the next phase." He slid a folder across the table, full of carefully forged documents. Then Reed leaned closer, voice sharp as a blade. "You need to be ready. The president must fall, before the elections." Outside, Ibrahim listened through the feed. The words hit him like ice. But he didn't flinch. He gave the command. In an instant, the door burst open. Shadows became soldiers. Guns rose. Voices shouted. Captain Zongo led the charge with precision. Hands up, he yelled. You're under arrest. Reed's face twisted with fury. You have no right. We're diplomats. Zongo didn't blink. Not tonight. Tonight, you're caught. As the agents were dragged away, a figure stepped into the doorway, unarmed, alone, unshaken. It was Ibrahim Traoré. Reed stared at him with disdain. You think you've won? I didn't win, Ibrahim replied, calm as steel. Burkina Faso did. The world woke up to headlines that rippled across continents. Foreign spies captured in Burkina Faso coup plot. Embassies scrambled. Governments deflected. But the truth was out. A plan to destabilize a sovereign African nation had been exposed, not by foreign intelligence, but by its own defenders. And leading the operation was not a general in exile or a foreign-backed strongman. It was a homegrown lion, a soldier, a patriot, a president who refused to kneel. The next morning, the sun rose brighter over Ouagadougou. There was a hum in the air, an energy in the streets. People whispered, the president caught them. Market radios buzzed with pride. Schoolchildren repeated his name. Ibrahim Traoré had saved his country. High above in the Kosiam Palace, Ibrahim stood alone on the rooftop. His face was still, but his heart burned, not with anger, but with duty. The shadow war was far from over. But Burkina Faso had turned the tide. That evening, he called for a national address. No grand spectacle. No political theater. Just a soldier in uniform, stepping to the podium with the eyes of the nation upon him. I speak to you tonight, he began, not as a president, but as your brother. Your son. Your soldier. His voice was steady. His words pierced like arrows. Foreign powers tried to poison our nation from the inside. They used one of our own to steal our plans, our dreams, and our future. They wanted fear. They wanted chaos. He paused. The silence across the country was electric. But they failed. Outside, crowds erupted. People clapped from their doorways, tea shops, rooftops, and remote villages where electricity was scarce but pride ran deep. I will never sell this country, Ibrahim declared. Not for gold. Not for deals. Not for power. Burkina Faso belongs to its people, and I will protect it with my life. Then, raising his hand, he spoke the words that would echo across Africa. I will never kneel to foreign masters. Never again. The message struck like thunder. Young leaders took note. African activists cheered. Even the old skeptics now watched with newfound respect. Ibrahim Traoré was no longer just a leader. He had become a symbol. A shield. A voice of the new African money, not controlled by outsiders, but driven by dignity and unity. That night, under a sky of stars, Ibrahim sat beside Captain Zongo. You did well, he said. Zongo smiled. I just followed your lead, sir. Ibrahim looked toward the horizon. They'll try again. Maybe with new faces, new tricks. Then we stop them again, Zongo replied. Ibrahim nodded. Yes. As long as we stand together, they'll never take this land. And with that, the lion rested, just for a moment. Because men like Ibrahim Traoré don't sleep for long. They rise with the people, they fight in silence, and they build a future where Africa kneels to no one. The sun had barely risen over Ouagadougou when President Ibrahim Traoré stepped into the modest café just a few blocks from the presidential compound. He wore a faded brown jacket and old sneakers, no presidential convoy, no guards, no media. To any outsider, he was just another local man grabbing coffee. But as he waited quietly in line, two foreign aid workers seated near the window exchanged glances and subtle whispers. One of them leaned toward the cashier and muttered, "He's standing too close to the register. Can someone tell that guy to step back? This isn't a charity line." The cashier hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but still turned and politely asked Ibrahim to wait outside while they served paying guests. The misunderstanding wasn't new. Even in his own country, Ibrahim often encountered this, disguised discrimination wrapped in concern, a condescending tone rooted in the belief that true leadership must look or act like something else. That morning, he stepped back silently and watched. The situation escalated when one of the aid workers, mistaking him for a loiterer, threatened to call security. "We've had issues before," she added, loud enough for everyone to hear. "People pretending to be someone they're not." Ibrahim didn't respond. He simply turned around, walked out of the cafe, and disappeared down the alley. But he wasn't angry. He was reflective. Because in that single moment, he had witnessed exactly what was wrong with how Africa was often viewed, even by those who claimed to serve it. Foreigners arrived with aid, with lectures, with blueprints and projects, believing they were the saviors, the thinkers, the doers. And yet, they never stopped to ask, to listen, or to realize that the real strength of Africa didn't wear expensive suits or speak with Western accents. The strength of Africa was humble. It was quiet. And it was rising. What those aid workers didn't know was that the man they dismissed was the very architect of the most daring African resistance to foreign manipulation in decades. Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just the president of Burkina Faso, he was the face of a growing movement. A movement that rejected the centuries-old dependency on foreign aid. A movement that coined the term New African Money, not printed by outsiders, but generated from Africa's own resources, ideas, and industries. Ibrahim envisioned an economy rooted in local ownership, African minerals refined in African factories, African land worked by African hands, and African minds building African technology. He had removed foreign military bases, reclaimed national gold mines, and blocked the financial leeches disguised as development partners. But in doing so, he became a threat, targeted not just by foreign governments, but by their local allies. They couldn't defeat him with bombs or bullets. So they tried whispers, smears, economic sabotage, and finally, espionage. Back in the palace, Ibrahim gathered his team. Among them was Captain Zongo, a sharp, loyal intelligence officer who had uncovered a radio signal weeks earlier, coded inside what looked like an agricultural report. But instead of crop yields, the report contained satellite images, encrypted maps, and the names of key defense personnel. "Only one of us could have sent this," Zongo said. And he was right. The betrayal came from within. The name they uncovered shook the room, Colonel Desire Ouattara. A friend. A brother. A man who had once saved Ibrahim's life in battle. Now, the same man was selling secrets to foreign agents. But Ibrahim didn't move to arrest him. Not yet. He whispered a plan instead, "Let the snake slither. We follow it to its nest." This was where African self-reliance revealed its true face, not just in cutting deals or reclaiming assets, but in strategy, patience, and intelligence. For decades, Africa had been taught to react, to panic, to beg for help. Ibrahim was changing the script. He didn't just want to survive foreign sabotage, he wanted to reverse it. To outsmart it. Over the next few days, Ouattara was followed. His phone tapped. His car tracked. And eventually, the proof emerged. Late at night, he visited a safe house near the French embassy. There, he met with two foreign agents, one American, one European. He handed them a file. They handed him a briefcase. Inside, US dollars. The price of betrayal. But here was the twist they never expected. The next file Ouattara handed over was fake, created by Zongo's team. And as the foreign agents discussed removing the president before the elections, Ibrahim listened in from a nearby van. He had heard enough. The takedown was surgical. No noise. No bloodshed. Just precision. The doors burst open. Agents were captured. And standing at the center of the storm was Ibrahim Traoré himself, calm, unarmed, resolute. "You think you've won?" one agent sneered. Ibrahim replied. "Spies caught. Coup foiled. And the man who stopped it all wasn't backed by foreign money or military might. He was backed by the will of his people." That day, the streets of Ouagadougou filled with chants, not of revenge, but of hope. Vendors, students, mothers, elders, they all knew, something had shifted. African unity was no longer a dream. It was breathing. And it had a name, Ibrahim Traoré. If you believe in justice, faith, and people who change the world from the shadows, then the story of Ibrahim Traoré is one you can't miss. A leader without luxury, without a stage, only courage and a burning vision for Africa. This is a breathtaking journey, full of twists, revelations, and a truth that shook the world. Smash that like, share the truth, and subscribe now so you won't miss the next chapter in this revolution. Let's keep the spirit of African strength and self-reliance alive, together. What began with a misunderstanding at a cafe became a metaphor for something much larger. The world had misjudged Africa, again. And just like Ibrahim that morning, the continent had quietly walked away, only to return stronger, wiser, ready. The age of dependence was ending. The age of dignity was beginning. Colonel Desire Ouattara sat alone in a cold underground room beneath the Kosiam Palace. The walls were bare, the light above him dim and flickering, the silence oppressive. He had not eaten, not slept, and now he waited, no longer as a soldier, but as a man stripped of illusion. Across the one-way mirror stood President Ibrahim Traoré, arms crossed, eyes steady. There was no anger in his face, only the weight of disappointment. This was the man he had once trusted with classified plans, state secrets, even his own life. And yet here they were, on opposite sides of a betrayal that echoed across borders. Captain Zongo stepped into the room and placed a small USB drive on the table in front of Ouattara. "We opened it," he said calmly. "Every document. Every name. Every secret you passed to them, it's all there." Ouattara said nothing. He stared at the floor, shoulders hunched. "You don't have to talk," Zongo continued. "But they won't protect you. They never do. To them, you're disposable. A tool. And now that you've been caught, you're a liability." That word, disposable, hit harder than chains. For months, Ouattara had believed he was climbing towards something greater. Foreign agents had promised him wealth, prestige, and most dangerous of all, purpose. A house in Paris. A high-level UN post. Quiet power behind the scenes after Ibrahim was removed. They fed his ego with just enough praise, just enough flattery to make him feel important. He thought he was playing them. But in truth, they had played him. And now, he sat alone, discarded like the very future he once dreamed of owning. Hours passed before he finally broke. Voice low, almost trembling, he began to confess. "It started with conversations," he said. "They found me after the gold nationalization. Said I could help stabilize the country. Said Ibrahim was dangerous. Too independent. Too radical. They said he was killing investment," Ouattara continued, eyes hollow. That he would isolate us from the world. They said we needed international oversight. And I believed them. Ibrahim entered the room then, slowly and without guards. He sat across from his old friend. The silence between them was sharp. You didn't just betray me, Ibrahim said, voice steady. You betrayed every mother trying to feed her children. Every soldier fighting to keep our borders safe. You sold their future. Ouattara couldn't meet his gaze. I'm sorry, he whispered. Sorry doesn't build a country, Ibrahim replied. But truth can. And so began the pivot. What had been meant as an act of destruction became a tool of resistance. Instead of discarding Ouattara, Ibrahim used his contacts, his trust, his access. They created a shadow network within the enemy's own network. For every real plan the agents expected, they sent false ones. For every genuine location, they gave a trap. The operation became known as the reversal. It was the embodiment of African self-reliance, not just politically, but strategically. Africa was no longer reacting. It was anticipating. No longer begging for partnerships, it was dictating terms. Ibrahim wasn't just a president. He was a strategist. A lion among wolves. And the wolves didn't see it coming. Within weeks, embassy officials began disappearing. Some were recalled quietly. Others were exposed publicly. Diplomatic channels scrambled to manage the narrative, but the damage was done. Leaks hit the press. Secret recordings emerged. Burkina Faso, once seen as vulnerable, had turned into a chessboard, and Ibrahim was playing grandmaster-level moves. This was new African money in its rawest form, not cash, but power. Not printed currency, but sovereign currency. Power to decide. Power to outmaneuver. Power to protect. Young Africans across the continent began sharing the story. On social media, in WhatsApp groups, even whispered in classrooms, one name kept rising: Ibrahim Traoré. He wasn't rich by Western standards. He didn't lead from ivory towers or foreign estates. He led from the trenches, shoulder to shoulder with his people. His life had become a living protest, a declaration that Africa was no longer for sale. But with every step forward came risk. The agents wouldn't give up. Their networks ran deep. Their resources were vast. But Ibrahim had something they didn't: unity. He had built more than a cabinet, he had built a brotherhood. Captain Zongo, the farmers, the students, the street vendors, the tribal elders, they were all part of it. No title necessary. Just loyalty. And belief. Belief that this time, Africa would rise on its own. As the trap closed around the foreign agents, one final meeting was arranged. A fake handover of national security plans. Ouattara, now wired, entered the safe house with forged documents. The agents welcomed him. They were preparing to act, to launch chaos before the elections. But outside, Ibrahim listened. When the agent said, "It's time to finish him," that was it. The raid was silent. Surgical. Professional. And when the agents were dragged out, it wasn't an angry mob waiting, it was their own failure, written across headlines the next day: "Foreign plot foiled by African intelligence." The world had underestimated a man because of his country. They had misjudged a leader because of his continent. But the lesson was clear now. This was no longer the Africa of old. This was new Africa, an Africa led by men who read the land like a book, who built intelligence from faith, and who knew that victory was not just about defense, it was about dignity. That day, under the vast Burkinabe sky, Ibrahim stood on the rooftop of his palace, not to look down, but to see farther. And he whispered not to the wind, but to the future. We stand alone, but never afraid.